sit back for the fourth and final part of our Goldfinger 60th anniversary celebration.
We've mentioned before, just in terms of Bond's allies, there's so many, like Felix and all the others, so many American, men with like grey hair in this film. Who seem miles older than Bond. I don't get it.
Lots of old men, yes. Felix is an old man in this, and it feels like we should have had the Felix from Dr. No, or the Felix from Thunderball early. He's good, but he's just not.
He's not Felix. He's just
that these guys are friends.
He's a
different generation to Bond, really.
Yeah. But he's younger than Jack Lord.
Yeah, I know.
That's crazy.
This is why Norman Burton's always my favourite, because of his hair colour. Never mind the fact that he's the best Felix.
Least popular apart from John Taylor.
The thing about age difference, the chap at the Bank of England.
Oh, yes.
He was 39, wasn't he? Or something?
And what was that, like 3 years older than Sean Connery? Or 4 years older than Sean Connery was at that time. And
when he was born, he was 26.
Yeah.
So he'd had a really tricky 9 months.
That was a scene you'd fast forward. We haven't mentioned that, have we? But,
with an overdose of Bombois.
They're having a brandy.
He's
commenting that it's a rather disappointing brandy.
Have a little more of this rather disappointing brandy. Well, what's the matter with it?
I'd say it was a 30-year-old fiend indifferently blended, sir. With an overdose of Bombois.
Colonel Smithers is giving the lecture, 007.
Just to debunk something, the Bombois isn't an additive that you'd put in a brandy like that to be distinctive. It's... Oh, go away.
I can see the shade in your face.
This is a celebration.
I suspect going out for a quiet drink with you, Chris, would be really, really taxing. What are you drinking that for? You realise you shouldn't be putting a straw in that. Is that lime? Have you put lime in it? For Christ's sake, will you leave me alone?
So good.
Well, he did have a Moretti before, to be fair to the man.
Well, this is it. In the old days, it would have been tenant super, and now he'd be off terrorising a housing estate. But no, he's gone for Moretti instead.
And terrorising
crisp flavour.
I think just on that scene, and then the Q scene and everything, but this film sort of presents Bond with those people in a different way to the previous films as well. Like, wait, is it this one where he corrects M and he seems to, M's a bit annoyed that he's like showing him up a bit. That's right. Well, we've not had that, have we? In Should Love or no. And then obviously when he's with Q, he's like, leaning on the, get on with it type thing, and then maybe pretty much like a school kid or I don't know,
Well, and Desmond's gone at the role in a completely different way. He's just the armourer in From Russia with Love, who was very casually showing him how to use the suit briefcase, and now all of a sudden
it's the world's
dislikes him.
Like expanding the character.
We've installed some rather interesting modifications. You see this arm here? Now open the top, and inside are your defense mechanism controls. Smoke screen, oil slick, rear bulletproof screen, and left and right front wing machine guns. Now this one I'm particularly keen about. You see the gear lever here? Now if you take the top off, you'll find a little red button. Whatever you do, don't touch it.
No, why not?
Because you'll release this section of the roof and engage and fire the passenger ejector seat. Whoosh.
Ejector seat? You're joking.
I never joke about my work, 007.
The audience absolutely love this kind of stuff. This is what, like, Bond fans who are very casual or don't know much about Bond, if you show them these Q scenes, they'll be rolling the aisles.
Yeah.
When we watch it,
totally.
Yeah, and it's funny, the attitude of Bond and the frustration.
Well, again, that scene, just another iconic scene. The scene with Q is really almost identical to the scene in GoldenEye, which is 30 odd years, more than 30 years apart. And the scene just works the same. It's the same. It's Q in like a naughty boy. And he delivers so many iconic lines, doesn't he, Desmond? Well, in this, he does the old "Now pay attention" 007, which
don't touch that.
Yeah. Now this I'm particularly keen on. I did write another one. Yeah, I mean, it is that scene that is then just played out over and over again with slightly different lines thrown in or different. But it just shows you how good that scene was. You go forward to Pierce Brosnan, 3 Bonds later, however many films later, and they are almost doing the scene exactly the same again. Because completely differently. Everyone just wants to go and see Q being Q, Bond being told off, and some fancy gadget.
They don't need to be related. Just keep it the way it is. Quite right.
Yeah.
I do remember when I had this on VHS, just repeatedly rewinding the Q branch scene, just because it seemed so cool, all of these gadgets being played with in the background, and then seeing the Aston Martin, and just it was amazing. And then also thinking, actually, Q branch itself as this cement walled bunker, and then
with
we
sandbags everywhere.
Yeah, because who knows what's going to happen around any corner.
Yeah.
And then you get that again later in For Your Eyes Only and The Living Daylights, where they're playing with the Aston again. And it's this cement bunker. I want that in the next Bond film. I want that kind of...
Non-negotiable.
Yeah.
It does. It's obviously quite a bunkery inspector, isn't it? Because he's, you know, sort of underground.
Yes.
That's best of Q. Great film. But it's just such a wonderful scene in Goldfinger, isn't it? And it, like so many things, it sets a template for how to do Bond. Q scenes you prefer, but they're all coming from that template and tweaking them, and some work better and some don't work as well.
It also has those moments where things are being tested in the background that you can look at and see. There's Bob Simmons shooting George Leach with a machine gun. Testing the bulletproof vest, all that sort of stuff.
Also, next time you watch it, I don't know why this stuck out to me this time. Desmond Llewellyn is obviously very tall. I mean, he's taller than Connery.
Yeah.
DB5 is not an easy car to get into.
He's crouching, isn't he? He's having to crouch a bit.
Yeah, he demonstrates the car, and you actually watch him get in, and you can see it's quite hard.
He
does it fairly smoothly, but you can see he's had to work at getting into that car.
Yeah.
And certainly with the opening title sequence, with all of the scenes being projected on the woman, I didn't notice until many years watching it. There are scenes from Q Branch projected onto her that you don't see in the film.
Oh wow.
Really?
So there's this moment, I think it's part of her legs or something, and Connery's walking along past a post office van, and the side drops down, and there's a machine gun inside. And that's not in the film. But if you look in Q Branch, in the background, in the distance, you can see a post office van missing a piece of its side. So like they found it. So the whole walk along of the putting the coin in the parking meter, and then the gas coming out. And then he goes to the next bit, as you've said, with the machine gun. So there was a third one, which was this post office van machine gun that happened earlier that got cut, but it's in the it's in the title sequence.
That's brilliant.
Just to be really
great spot.
This is something else entirely. This stands on its own, Goldfinger. It doesn't have any of that Cold War aspect. This is an action movie. This is a thriller. Of course, without Goldfinger, you wouldn't have Spy Who Loved Me, especially in terms of like having the car, the babes, the villain, the henchman, the main plot. And this is where it all started. And I think that's something to really sort of admire in the grounding force of what Goldfinger is and its legacy that will probably go on. And even though that I know a lot of people, especially that grew up with the Bond movies after Connery, especially the people who were kids in the 1970s that grew up with Roger Moore, or people like me who were Pierce Brosnan fans, and the 2010s kids where they grew up with Daniel Craig, and they may prefer, a Casino Royale or Skyfall or GoldenEye, well, it's not enough, Spy Who Loved Me or Moonraker, a lot more than Goldfinger, but they can all appreciate where all that come from. Because if it wasn't for Goldfinger, we wouldn't have had all the other films and their surreal moments and the big bombastic explosions and the music and everything else. You wouldn't have had all that happens in all the other movies if it wasn't for Goldfinger. Here's to Goldfinger and everything that they have done. A happy 60th anniversary to that film, and thank you very much to you guys at Really 007. Take care. Oh, but before I go, got your passport, got the leaflet, sent off. Oh, have you ever heard of this game? Is it a game? Could be Brosnan's 5th movie. Voila. But there we go. Thank you very much, Goldfinger. Happy anniversary.
We will conclude matters by just giving our overall thoughts and just giving more love for it. And I think we could go back to that question: where is it a Mount Rushmore Bond? Is it an absolute classic, this film? Would you show it to other people? So I'll start with John, because it was sort of your concoction, really.
Which one? Me or John Orty?
Certainly not John Orty, he isn't.
It on me.
Yeah, it's an iconic Bond film. It's got everything you want in a Bond film. I think one of the reasons why it's a Mount Rushmore is you've basically got the best of so many people. So you've got Ken Adams sets, John Barry's score, Norman Wanstall sound editing, Peter Hunt's editing. I mean, you've got Sean Connery as Bond. You've got Guy Hamilton really encouraging Sean Connery to express himself in this kind of the lifestyle of Bond way. You've got an amazing actress playing the lead role. You've got an amazing villain and some of the most outrageous dubbing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, I never knew it was dubbing ever. I mean, his voice, I don't know what Gert Frobe sounded like, but his voice sounds perfect for that role. You know, it's absolutely brilliant, such as that. Harold Sakata. I mean, the golf scene alone just shows Connery's coolness. I mean, I absolutely love the film. The car, I've not even mentioned the car, you know. And yeah, it comes in at number 9 on my personal rankings. And it's just top 10. And anything that's in my top 10, I give 9 or 10 out of 10 for. You know, that's how much I love these films. It's my second favorite Connery film overall. I just about prefer From Russia with Love. But having said that, this will be the one that I show to Ruben first before I show him Russia with Love. I understand John's point about it being overrated because of the barometers, that everything else is barred against it. And I think that's a very fair point. But I'm really wary that I do feel as well that Bond fans are starting to underrate it a bit recently, and sometimes you just have to step back and just watch it. I understand, you know, it's a bit babyish to say, "Oh, Goldfinger's the best" and stuff, but if you just step back and just watch everything in this film, it's 2 hours of pure joy. I love it. I just love it. And to me, if I did a Mount Rushmore of Bond films, it would be Goldfinger, Spy Who Loved Me, GoldenEye, and Casino Royale. And like that's not the 4 best films. It's not my 4 favorite films, but I'd say in terms of films that everyone knows, or in terms of films that
landmark or significant,
part of the pop culture at that time as well, that kind of thing. And I think that maybe Skyfall instead of Casino Royale, maybe you can shift that one. But yeah, it's great. And 60 years on, it holds up. I remember getting a book when I was younger, 501 films you must see. And we're talking like full on, proper, Third Man. You get to the thrillers, Third Man. And then you move Vertigo, Usual Suspects is your 90s one. But Goldfinger was in there.
Yeah.
It was the only James Bond one there. Goldfinger was in there. I think that's right. I think that's right because I think outside of James Bond, it holds a massive place in cinema.
Yeah.
It's class.
I completely agree. I think that it is up there for all of the reasons that we've discussed this evening and more that we haven't even touched on. I think it's not just a Bond film, though. I think it sits outside that arena and it's transcended beyond the Bond franchise, and it is something far bigger and more influential. When it came out, it was a real cultural event and one that we're still feeling the effects of, whether that's for better or worse. That's for others to say. We're obviously here to heap praise upon it, but it's one of those films where everyone talked about it and everyone went to see it, and everywhere you looked, there was a tie-in for it and a thing about it. There was a riot at the cinema at its premiere, and doors were smashed and the police couldn't control the crowd. Such was the excitement for this. It had, something that big hadn't been seen for years, or if not before. Usually you went to the cinema and you saw Doctor in Love or one of the Carry-Ons, or obviously there were action films as well for the time, but nothing on this sort of scale. And it really just caught the imagination of the world. Personally, is it one of my favorites? It's up there. It's not obviously Octopussy, Honor and Majesty's Secret Service, but that's fine. It's still certainly top 5 and absolutely top 10 if you were going to get into a fight. Just to add a sad subnote to it, it's sad Fleming died on the 12th of August, 1964, and the premiere was the 17th of September, just weeks later, and he never saw the film, and he never really got a taste of how big Bond mania was going to be, like Beatlemania, that was about to grip the world and basically define the decade. And that was something that he'd created, and he never really, he could, they could see it coming, but he never really got to fully enjoy it. And, that adds a sour note to it, but it is such a big phenomenon, and it looms larger than the franchise itself. It is that big.
Well, firstly, I think people who say it's underrated are wrong, but that's just because they need re-educating. It's not underrated. Some of the other Bond films are underrated. That, I think, is the problem. Goldfinger cannot be underrated because but some of the other Bond films aren't rated highly enough. So you end up with a disparity. So that's what my argument to that would be. Goldfinger's brilliant. Some of the other Bond films should be regarded up here or here.
Yeah.
You can't take away the brilliance of Goldfinger because it is so definitive in all the things we've talked about tonight. I think if you want to know how good this film is, you just watch the pre-credits sequence, which has everything in about 5 minutes, a complete adventure. You literally join the film with Bond getting out of the water in his scuba gear. You are straight in. He goes in and blows up a big villain's base, which, by the way, has a nice set in it that they obviously spent a few just for something that's only going to appear for a few seconds in the film. You've then got the coolness of him taking off the gear. He's got his white suit jacket. You have the explosion. You have the fight. You have the guy killed in the bath with one of the best one-liners of shocking. And he shuts the door and the music kicks in. I mean, has anybody in 1964 gone into a cinema and had that thrown at them instantly for the first 5 minutes? I can't think of anything. I mean, Vertigo's exciting opening to it, and there have been other great films, of course, that have. But to come in and have your senses kicked like that for 5 minutes from the moment you've walked in, you've already got your value out of your cinema ticket, and the music's only just kicked in. So, wow, it is brilliant. Like you guys, not my favorite Bond film, but it's an iconic Bond film which allowed the series to grow. It's top 10 for me, probably around about 8, 9, or 10. But that's only because, as I said, these other films that aren't rated highly enough should be up here because they're brilliant and they somewhat Goldfingered it. So there you go. And I know John Ortiz going to tell me I'm wrong, and it is overrated.
Go on, John.
No, I'm not, you've mentioned it very clearly there. You said, that there are. That's probably the point I was trying to drive at.
Yeah.
That it's put up here on this pedestal, when in point of fact there are a whole bunch of films that could quite happily sit among that, but because this has so much weight behind it as far as the period, where it was in '64, would be fascinating to have found From Russia with Love followed by Thunderball, wouldn't it? And it moving out of that 64 slot and maybe happening a bit further down the line. Would an older Connery with a different cast be able to carry it off? But I think because of what it was at the time and all the bits and pieces that we've discussed this evening, nobody's taking anything away from the fact that it's an iconic picture. My point was simply the fact that it's not just the only one. There are 24 others, and a bunch of those are really worth their weight in gold, as Steve very clearly pointed out there, that you can't just put this one on the top. I think there's a whole bunch of others which are really not considered when they probably should be. So that's my taking on it. Is it one of my favorites? Well, yeah, it's not in my top 10 like everybody else's, but nevertheless. Primarily because I don't go back and watch it often enough. Maybe if I went back and would watch it more often, I did see it on the big screen, and that did make a big difference. That for the 60th anniversary, I either had it on video, DVD, or I'd seen it on TV. So to see it on a big screen did make a big difference. And it is something that probably should be watched on a big screen when you're going to do it. But I mean, it doesn't take anything away from it.
It's so iconic. It is one that, if at the Oscars they're talking about Bond or whatever, then scenes from Goldfinger are it's most likely going to be Goldfinger that there are scenes from that you see, and John Ortiz mentioned, like, it's this interesting thing that it established loads of different tropes and things that have become what people think are staples for Bond films. And I would agree that it isn't necessary for every Bond film to have all of those things, or most of them even. But it is interesting. And when people say that they want, it didn't feel like a Bond film or something, probably a lot of the time it's gold. It's this sort of Goldfinger that they're kind of thinking back to. But yeah, it's such it's a delightful watch. I think you can put it on and enjoy it on a Sunday afternoon, but then I also watched it for the 60th anniversary, and the difference. I mean, From Russia with Love, it was great going watching that, and obviously Dr. No, that was an amazing thing. But once we got to Goldfinger, you're like, whoa, this is big. I can see why this, really, like, projected the series into a new realm and everything. It really was brilliant to watch it on the big screen. And yeah, like I say, it's the one that when you talk to your friends, they might have watched this, particularly, perhaps older people. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of ranking films, particularly Bond films, because I just find it difficult, and I find it like, well, I don't particularly want to start thinking about what's better than, or what's not as good. Do you know what I mean? I just love these films. And I think it's probably the easiest of Sean's to watch. It's probably the easiest of nearly all of them to watch. And yeah, I absolutely love it.
Brilliant. It's just become a little bit untrendy from the sort of Fleming Easters to sort of say, "Oh yes, Goldfinger." That is you never hear one of them say that. They contractually would have to say From Russia with Love, Dr. No, On Her Majesty's, Casino Royale, and you very rarely go beyond those. You very rarely hear. I mean, Thunderball would never ever be considered a look-in from them. Goldfinger is teetering. They might have to admit that actually this is quite Fleming, this is quite Bond, this is quite a good film, but maybe not in public in front of other Bond fans. They wouldn't have to admit that. So I'm. You're absolutely right, Steve. Of course, it's not underrated. I mean, it's one of the most famous films of all time, isn't it? And the box office was an absolute joke. John Orty mentioned riots going on in the cinema. I think one of the things as well is this is the third Bond film. You just think of it as so established. Everything in it is so established by now that it fits in with the Roger Moores. It fits in with the Pierce Brosnans, doesn't it? It sits alongside them as this is exactly the same genre. This is the same character, the same feel, everything. And I think for that reason, people not think of it as just another Bond film, but they think of it as a stock Bond film, a box ticking Bond film, rather than. I think, Harry, we say we love each film in its own right. It has its own universe, its own mission. And I think instead of saying rankings, it'd just be like, no, I wouldn't have done anything differently for this plot, with these characters in this film. I would keep it. I wouldn't. Yes, some of the decisions with Pussy Galore and all that might have to have a rewrite. But overall, I mean, you can't. The casting, the directing, the sound, the music, the performances. Even the fights. I know we aren't get to the stage where we've got these jaw-dropping stunts yet, but we have got good set pieces. We've got very memorable fights, very memorably staged scenes, sets. And the costumes, the clothes. The whole aspirational Bond, the whole David Zaritsky, the fashion of Bond, that kind of thing. This is really Penfold Golf, all this stuff. It's so iconic, and it should not be criticised for that. It's pioneering, and it is the fact that it's 60 years old and your guys' kids are like glued to these scenes just says it.
Although it is something of the 60s, there's a timeless feel to this film, I think. And we were watching The Bourne Supremacy the other night, and even that, which I don't think those are ridiculously dated films in some ways, some of the styling and but like just going to an internet cafe and doing a Google search in one scene, that feels dated.
Yeah.
Like this, even the technology, the tracker and stuff, that doesn't feel dated. And I just think this is a timeless film in many ways.
I'm obsessed with the heel in the tracker heel. Looked like Dad's shoes, when he went to work. I don't think we really had those shoes at that age, did we? When we were your school shoes weren't quite like that. But I always tried to feel them. But could you roll it back the heel to?
Yeah,
it's just magical, isn't it?
The gadgets really come in. So there's the thing he puts the tracker on his car, the thing that he puts in his heel. Can you remember all this?
Oh, the homing device.
Yeah, the homing device. Yeah, he takes his shoe, doesn't he, and puts it in there. And there's loads of noises like that. It's just amazing.
Here's a nice little transmitting device called a homer. You prime it by pressing that back like this. You see? The smaller model is now standard feel issue to be fitted into the heel of your shoe. Its larger brother is magnetic.
Is there a peep in the car?
Yeah.
Audio visual, range 150 miles.
Ingenious and useful too. Allow a man to stop off for a quick one en route.
It has not been perfected out of years of patient research entirely for that purpose, 007.
You can remember all this now.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I knew I wouldn't be able to find that peep. So what I did, I found a pee, a long sound, and then just cut a piece in each time.
Yeah. Is that how
genius?
It's done? Yeah.
Genius.
Harry, go on. I mean, I know you re-watched them, didn't you, in lockdown in order? And
so I got to see the progression, and like anyone who watches would, and you only and on that note, you don't need to watch many. You get to the third one, like you mentioned, and you see the confidence that's behind. I mean, there was already a lot of confidence put into From Russia with Love, really, on the back of Dr. No, but this takes it another level. And like I've mentioned before, the way that it just raises things a little and puts itself out there. It takes some risk, you know. From Russia with Love was successful, and but they've decided to go more and try new things and start to build a world that they didn't necessarily have to. And I'm gutted that I've not seen this at the cinema. I missed it on its 60th, you know, in the 60th Bond year, but also in this current anniversary. I'm not able to see it because I know and I can imagine just what an impact it'd have on the big screen. It's for me, it's like I've talked about. It's one that's on fairly. It was rotated as a child a lot. Some of the scenes, the whole film, just this the first half, just the second half, the middle chunk. It was Goldfinger and it went everywhere. You know, Goldfinger always appeared. But to see it in the cinema, I'm sure would be spectacular. You know, it's colourful. It's, you know, the locations are great. There's costumes that are memorably attached to the characters, and then John Barry's score, the sound from Norman Wanstall, and then Ken Adams' sets. Everything came together absolutely brilliantly, and I'd love to see all those things on the big screen because I bet I can imagine the fever that Chris described at the opening nights and things like that. That in a way that must have been elevated from Russia with Love. For me, it's even though it's so familiar and all that, and I don't like ranking either, but it wouldn't be in my top 5. It might be in my top 10. I've no idea, but it's not. I suppose all the Mount Rushmore ones aren't necessarily my favourites, and I don't think that's me, you know, rebelling in any kind of way. It's not me saying, you know, oh, there's no need to like them. It's the point that a few of us now have made that there are others that are absolutely spectacular. But this set the trend. This went in. This put all that creativity, took all those risks, and it deserves so much credit for that because the significant impact it's had. I know there'll be Bond fans who will want to just calm down all the hype it's getting and provide an alternate point of view that this isn't the best or whatever. But when like colleagues or casual film fans or Bond fans, people you meet, talk about Goldfinger and things that they remember from it, I'm proud. I'm really happy. There are things that this film has done that have set it apart and absolutely ingrained it in the culture of the time and decades later. And I will join in with those conversations and say, absolutely, you know, how good is the song, even though it's not my favorite? How good is, you know, Shirley Bassey's song? How good is, you know, these characters, you know, a character called Pussy Galore, you know, like of course, I'm proud this is Bond and no other franchise, no other film has done it, and put it in this and portrayed it in such a way. And, you know, the portrayal of Odd Job has stuck. It's something that's had impact on future, you know, action films and spoofs. But I'm proud of what it's done for the Bond franchise. Even though it might not be my favourites, we owe it so much. And of course, it's not underrated. It is rightly very, very highly rated.
Just to end, lads, happy birthday, Goldfinger. Happy 60th. Pensioner now.
Yeah.
Can afford his own pencils now.
Hip hip hooray for Goldfinger.
Oh, no, you don't. This is no time to be rescued.